Hi everyone! Happy New Year! This is Fiona Apollo and I do art commentary. If you're new here, I like talking about animation and fandom, as well as the behaviours surrounding these topics. And today, this video is about Bluey. Or Bluey's fandom, I guess. Now, Bluey is an interesting show. What appears to be a simple preschool children's cartoon has somehow ended up striking a chord with many older audiences across the internet and the world. And it's also been praised for being a fantastic and wholesome example of entertainment for all ages being done correctly. Personally speaking, I'm someone who believes in the power of positive reinforcement when it comes to making your way through life. When you're growing up, being exposed to a sense of understanding and encouragement around you is something that not only helps inform your worldview into adulthood, but it also prepares you for what can often be considered difficult situations or topics without crumbling under the pressure of them. And the best way that we often get exposed to these things is through not only the people around us, but the media we consume, such as books, music, movies, and TV. A lot of people have this preconception that hardships will make you tougher, but that's not necessarily true, and especially not for kids. And this is where Bluey comes in. For the past few months, like many people, I've been partial to a bit of mindless TikTok scrolling, and there's been this surge of videos, you know the ones, where people have basically found a way to bypass copyright by split-screening bite-sized clips of shows alongside these soap-cutting or really weird slime creation videos. And one very prominent, very adorable show that's been making the rounds in amongst clips of The Simpsons, Family Guy, and Big Mouth is an Australian animated series about a family of dogs. Many people have praised the show for its lovely visuals, sense of humour, and its mature yet friendly approach to tricky subjects such as how to deal with infertility and even loss without dumbing itself down. In short, the show feels like it not only understands, but respects its audience of all ages, and people are being very receptive to that. That said, I'm also interested in this because there are whispers here and there of history repeating itself. And what do I mean by that? Well, the surprise sensationalism of Bluey lately has caused people to start drawing parallels to what happened when another cute cartoon that focused on colourful animals and was aimed at children became popular with adults in the early 2010s. Yep, we're also going to be talking about My Little Pony and Bronies, and we're going to be going over the similarities and differences between what happened with MLP versus what's happening with Bluey. Is it a case of history repeating itself? Are Bluey fans going to become as toxic as the Brony fandom once was? I'm honestly not convinced. The Brony fandom is pretty infamous, they've done a lot of bad things which I'll get into, and Bluey is so far comprised of a slightly different demographic by comparison, which I'll also get into. Personally, I think Bluey would have some pretty big hooves, or paws, to fill, to even get on MLP's level. But as we all know by now, nothing is ever set in stone, so that's why we're going to do a bit of introspection and chat about it. As always, a lot of what I say in my videos is purely speculative, and not based in fact unless stated otherwise. Always do your own research before repeating anything I say. I'm just a random person with an opinion on the internet, I'm allowed that. But that also doesn't mean I know everything. If you like this video, please remember to like, comment and subscribe. It makes me very, very happy and it would be a grand start to 2023. Here we go! Part 1. Bluey and the Inner Child. So let's quickly explain Bluey and the sitch surrounding it for people who may not know. Bluey is an animated series released on the 1st of October 2018 on ABC Kids in Australia and is also currently available internationally on Disney+. The show focuses on the titular character Bluey and her family the Heelers, which is the name for the family's dog breed, the Australian Blue Heeler. The character Bluey herself was also inspired by the real-life Blue Heeler dog of the same name, who also happens to hold the record of having been the oldest dog who has ever lived at 29 years and 5 months. The series has received consistently high viewership and ratings right from the get-go, to the point where it was reported that by May 2021, the show had generated over 480 million plays across all of Australian Broadcasting Corporation's TV channels. Factors like the pandemic probably had a hand in that, but that's still a pretty impressive metric all things considered. Throughout the series, Bluey, her sister Bingo, and their friends of other dog breeds will often use different games as a way to bond, see things in a different way, and instill lessons and teachings onto them as they go about daily life. It's very much a slice-of-life show, there's no magic, no fantasy elements outside of some dream sequences, and for the most part it's just the family going about their day, and it is the cutest thing. There is a very big emphasis on exhibiting healthy family dynamics in the show, which, you know, makes sense. The parents of Bluey, Bingo, and their friends are very responsive to their children's games, and also take the time to communicate with them without dismissing their feelings or concerns. The show also goes out of its way to depict disagreements among adults, parents needing a break every once in a while, and even more serious topics like infertility and loss, as we mentioned before. A good few people have praised Bluey for being an example of effective gentle parenting, which is a parental practice that encourages children to make decisions based on their own willingness as opposed to feeling pressured to do something just because their parents say so. This method, when done correctly, is extremely effective at allowing your children to feel motivated to voluntarily do good deeds like tidying up and being considerate of others, without the constant expectation of a material reward after the fact. The show has also been especially praised for the depiction of Bluey's parents, specifically the dad Bandit, as a positive father figure, to the point where there is some debate on whether or not he is a realistic depiction. I'm sorry to say, but I think a lot of that debate is driven by people who maybe didn't have great fathers and as such don't really have anything to solidly compare him to, but I can at least say that yeah, he is a realistic and positive father figure, and we should have more dads like Bandit both in media and real life. Bandit is a great dad and a fantastic character, and so is the mum Chili. The parents really bounce off of each other and they really work together well as a family unit. So we can see that the series is very successful and appealing on kids' channels, and we can likely deduct that the majority of people watching on those platforms are preschool-age children and their parents. So where does the rest of the audience come into it? While the show is extremely popular on kids programming, it also happens to be one of the most streamed kids shows on Disney Plus as well, and this is where I think some of that adult audience have started to latch onto it. Disney Plus and other streaming services obviously make it easier for people of any age to watch certain shows, and this is most certainly the case when it comes to mediums like animation becoming more mainstream, and less stigmatized and boxed into being considered just a children's medium. I just want to say that there is actually nothing wrong with adults watching this show or any show specifically aimed at kids. People can watch whatever makes them happy. With these kinds of shows though, they are crafted for all ages in mind, and you can see that with a lot of dialogue and jokes between Chili, Bandit, and the other parents as well. The vast majority of kids programming is aimed at families with the express knowledge that parents are probably being made to watch these shows. So like most of my videos, I put out a couple of posts asking why people watch Bluey and on what platform. There were a pretty good handful of answers, but the majority of them came down to what we just touched on. Firstly, the show is extremely cute and wholesome, and many people just enjoy having something simple and easily digestible to watch and help them unwind from real life for a minute. One big thing is the aesthetics. I would honestly love to live in the Bluey universe from an artist's perspective. It's just so colourful and appealing. The shapes and details of the characters, objects, and buildings are all very rounded and give a very comfortable feel. And I think a good few people agreed on that too. Quite a few parents gave their thoughts and expressed that they found Bluey to not only be entertaining for their kids, but it helped them with certain aspects of parenting, whether it be learning by example of Chili and Bandit, or seeing their own parenting habits reflected in the other characters like Chloe's dad or Coco's mum, but also by having their feelings validated when it comes to more emotional aspects to parenting. A lot of parents I've known growing up and spoken to tend to have this constant internal dialogue of, I'm not doing this right, I'm not a good parent, why is my child not doing as good as this other child? And Bluey acknowledges this concern in some very heartwarming episodes and scenes. One parent commented that a friend suggested they watch the episode Baby Race, and they were in tears within 15 minutes because they felt seen and empathised with Chili's struggles of wanting to do well as a mum. So while that is extremely sweet and lovely, the reason why I think this show has experienced a boom in popularity is possibly a combination of two things. One thing is TikTok and other platforms re-uploading whole episodes, allowing them to be so much more widely accessible to people who don't own streaming platforms like Disney Plus. So far, I know that they're available on TikTok. They were on Spotify, but they got taken down because people were wrongly uploading them as a podcast. And the official Bluey YouTube channel actually has all of Season 1 uploaded in one video. And the other contributor is because a lot more people are now going to therapy. Just a quick note, I'm not a medical professional, do not take my word for that. A lot of this is secondhand knowledge combined with my own ramblings, but I'm actually being serious. I think that people going to therapy, or people who seek therapy, make up a decent percentage of viewers here. So in therapy, specifically in regards to cognitive behavioural therapy, or CBT, there is a rather large emphasis on working through unresolved situations and feelings from childhood, and this is sometimes referred to as healing your inner child. Now, this in itself is not something that people will initially relate to if you don't go to therapy yourself, but if you look closely at some of the language that has become popular in the last 10 years, so terms like self-care, the shifting perspectives towards taking care of your own mental health, and even the relaxing of attitudes surrounding cringe or childish hobbies and interests, when you combine all of this, all of a sudden you have all of these Gen X, Millennial, and Gen Z grown-ups coming back around to things that they found comfort in or may have liked as a young child, even when they don't have kids of their own, because they are going back and essentially trying to nurture that inner child. Bluey is a fine example of that because it is giving people this idealized scenario of a happy childhood where you are understood and cared for by the grown-ups around you. And oftentimes, people tend to latch onto cartoons the most because with gadgets like phones and iPads, screen-based media is the most accessible avenue for nostalgia these days. Something that may also come to mind with this is how many older people are now buying more plushies, squishmallows, and teddy bears. Combine all of that and all of a sudden you have this explosion of interest in a cute, low-stakes, beautifully made TV show that many older people who may not have initially known of its existence are now referring to as their comfort series. And that honestly is such a sweet thing that in of itself is not a problem in the slightest. Bluey is an adorable show and you can see the time and effort put into it by the creators and animators. My partner often laughs when they notice me watching a clip of it on the Clock app, but as an animator I can't help but take a minute to cast my eyes over the gorgeous settings and fluid character animation, and also revel in the memories of when my parents spent time with me in the same way Bluey and Bingo's parents do with them. But I will say, there are still sometimes a few issues when these kinds of shows become popular, no matter how wholesome they may outwardly seem, and while I don't think it is or will ever get on the same level of the show we will be discussing in the next section, nor is it something really that is a problem with just Bluey, it's definitely something to think about when it comes to social attitudes in general. So one issue I find is that, especially on a platform like TikTok, it is a breeding ground for people who seem to have no idea how good parenting works, and who also just lack any kind of empathy whatsoever. Even for a fictional toddler. You look at any kind of video on TikTok where someone is trying to spread a bit of joy or happiness, and there will always be a couple of schmucks with the ugliest profile pictures in existence, spewing some absolute left field garbage, and these Bluey clips are no exception. Anytime a child character behaves like, you know, a child, and this isn't even just with Bluey actually, I've seen it on TikToks of people just showing their children getting up to God knows what, and the comments will be filled with how much they hate this literal baby and how they would discipline them, which, by the way, almost always includes some form of child abuse. Some of that is satire, I know that, and the comedy would probably land better if it was only 1 or 2 comments, but when those comments are in the hundreds and you start getting the sense that some of these people aren't being ironic about it, you have to wonder how many of them are actually fit to be around children in real life. I've seen this play out especially among fans of the show on the platform with certain characters like Muffin, Bluey's 3-year-old cousin who is shown to be rambunctious and a tiny bit spoiled, and Bluey's neighbour and friend Judo, who I believe is an only child and is also a Chow Chow, which is known to be a temperamental breed, who sometimes has a bit of a bossy attitude. These are normal traits that people have, including children, but people just have this weird lack of filter on the internet where they think they can just say really out there things about anyone, but it's okay because it's only a video of a stranger or a fictional character who isn't real. It's just really weird to me and I get so much secondhand embarrassment from it, like, are you okay? Why is a fictional dog making you so mad? Like, who hurt you? The other thing is that there have been these, like, jokey TikToks of people going out and buying Bluey merchandise, and people are trying to stir the pot by saying that this is preventing actual children from getting them, which that isn't how merchandising works. Toy manufacturers do not care who is buying the product, so long as that product is flying off the shelves. The only reason I'm giving this any kind of consideration is because I remember the days of My Little Pony where people got genuinely ratty towards kids actually playing with toys of the series, but from what I've seen of this supposedly happening with Bluey, there is nothing, there's no evidence. At most, I've seen some people making TikToks like me pushing all the toddlers out of the way to get the Bluey plush, but it's like a person joking around punching the air in their living room. Until I see an actual video of someone pushing a child to the floor to buy a Bluey toy, I don't think that's currently a huge or even a real problem. When a fandom grows, you are always going to get that small but ever-present percentage of rabid fans who grow with it and likely will be guilty of doing some of those things. But I really don't think Bluey is at particular risk of that happening because of the attitude of the people who are fans of this show, and the fact that it really pales in comparison to what it was like for fandoms such as MLP. I'm also of the mind that MLP came out during a different time within fandom where people weren't constantly being assaulted on all sides with new shows that get cancelled after like 1 season, so people weren't as afraid of committing to a show back then to the point of major fanaticism. On that note, I think we've spoken enough about Bluey just for now. Let's move on and talk about My Little Pony and the impact of the Brony fandom and try to tie things together. Part 2, MLP and the Brony Phenomenon. Oh geez, where do we begin? So there are a few different incarnations of the My Little Pony franchise, considering it's based off of the main toy series owned by Hasbro. But the one we'll be looking at specifically is My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. Friendship is Magic is an animated series created by Lauren Faust, focusing on a collection of 6 characters, but for the most part, the main storyline revolves around the protagonist, Twilight Sparkle. The core series first aired on October 10th, 2010 on The Hub, and ran until October 28th, 2017, excluding the film and specials, finishing its run on Discovery Family. Friendship is Magic is actually one of the highest rated productions in the Hub's history, and this was in part due to the fact that it resonated with a demographic outside of its intended audience of young girls. Unforeseen by the crew who made the series, it became almost unbelievably popular with men aged between 18 and 35, so much so that the merchandising team decided to experiment with different types of goods for this new demographic, including but not limited to magazines, prints, vinyl figures, even going so far as to license official anime figurines and manga. I think what spurred this on at first, and the reason MLP's fandom became as big as it was, is in part due to 2010 onwards being a time when progressivism was becoming much more important to many people. This was a time when we were really starting to see a big push for a variety of social changes. Queer and trans identities felt more inclined to be open about themselves, and people were beginning to delve into hobbies and interests that fell outside of the old preconceptions of what either boys or girls could indulge in. I'm pretty sure that this was also around the time that Tumblr was hitting its peak too, and was pretty much revolutionizing social concepts in its own way on the platform. And it was also a huge breeding ground for artistic creativity in the form of fan art, theories, episode predictions, games, and so much more. But the MLP craze didn't really come from Tumblr. It actually came from 4chan. 4chan is a mess. I'm not getting into it. But essentially, the whole thing started when someone decided to rag on the show on 4chan's forums. And 4chan, being the way that it is, did its thing of sending waves of ironic but slowly becoming less ironic over time fans to enforce that actually no, this show is good and you are wrong. Which, to give them credit, Friendship is Magic was a very good show with a solid narrative, good character growth, interesting plot points, very gratifying conclusions such as the main protagonist Twilight becoming a princess in her own right later on, funny Easter eggs, and a bunch of other things. Shows like this don't just become popular if the story is unbearable, though bear in mind, the fandom was a meme at the very beginning until people genuinely started to get into the show. I personally think it was overhyped a bit, but hey, I can't really say anything past that. I was a part of the Homestuck fandom and we were just as, if not more, insufferable at the time. Also, there's a Homestuck reference in Bluey. Look. Do you see it? Do you see it? Tell me you see it. But regardless, 4chaners went hard by blowing up the series, and it just kind of snowballed from there. It actually got to the point where 4chan moderators banned posting about ponies because it was spilling onto pretty much every other forum on the site, and any content regarding it was to be posted on PonyChan instead, a kind of 4chan-esque site dedicated to the series. 2010 to 2013, you could not escape My Little Pony unless you literally blacklisted it in the tags, and even then, it still got through if it wasn't tagged. It was everywhere. But surely this on its own, it wasn't a big deal. Why are we so wound up over a bunch of grown men liking a kids show? There's nothing wrong with that, and I agree, if it stayed at just that. If you know anything about the history of the internet, you may know that until they decided to shoot themselves in the foot by banning it and having almost its entire user base migrate, sites like Tumblr were infamous for having hordes of blogs dedicated to NSFW content. Although a lot of this content didn't actually originate from Tumblr, it usually came from Newgrounds or other forum-based platforms, especially in regards to videos and things. But Tumblr was the place where the majority of the more casual fanbase used to frequent, and it only took a handful of people to talk about something to get it circulating. When MLP came out, because the fandom originated on a forum site as an ironic meme, a lot of the jokes and things surrounding it were pretty extreme and edgy, and because something like that had never been done in regards to a kids show and to this magnitude before, it kind of became a big deal and you literally just couldn't get away from it. The NSFW scene of My Little Pony included everything from explicit imagery, relationships, creepypasta, dark fan theories, and fanfiction. It even got to the point where any content regarding MLP that contained gore or horror elements received its own label as grimdark content. This included written works like Cupcakes and Stockholm, but also included music videos like Smile, and even games like the Luna games. There are a bunch of videos online talking about how bad a lot of it was, Stockholm especially, and for good reason. I'll be leaving some links below to the kinds of things the MLP fandom got up to. Izzy's actually made a fantastic video outlining a lot of them lately, so if you're interested, go check it out. Now, I don't think NSFW in itself is something that shouldn't be allowed. You can make whatever content you want within reason, aka so long as it's legal and you keep it to certain spaces. But one big problem back then was the fact that when small kids wanted to look up pictures or videos of their favourite ponies, there was a high chance of that particular content popping up, to which you might say, if you're a responsible parent or guardian, you wouldn't let your child peruse certain websites, or you would age restrict YouTube until they were the right age anyway. And a lot of people did do that, but the problem is that the internet was still very unregulated in a lot of ways back then, including on search engines like Google. Google can still be pretty hit and miss even now. If a child was to do a Google search on their favourite pony, they still had a chance of running into those images. I think personally when people see these two series being conflated together, this is the kind of thing that they get really worried about, and for good reason. Younger and older fans can absolutely coexist on equal terms in certain ways, but there has to be a sense of understanding that the older party, intentionally or not, will be responsible for keeping the younger fans safe when they are occupying a space or taking part in an interest that is intended for all ages. And if they don't, people will come at them, as it should be. And there also needs to be a certain degree of protection in place for kids online, of which the majority of that responsibility should fall to parents. There is often a point in a child's life where they typically decide that out of curiosity they are going to seek out content that they were previously warned away from. And I'm not saying that you can't make certain content because of that risk, but if it has the chance of impacting a child's psyche who did not make the conscious decision to go find it, then it's best to keep it designated to a certain space that you know they don't frequently go to. It wouldn't be fair to pin all of the blame on people who do try to be responsible in these ways, and things are always going to get through the cracks or someone will inevitably go looking for them, but it's just something worth keeping in mind. The issue with a lot of kids-based media that end up cultivating an adult fanbase is that this does unfortunately open up a bit of a floodgate where children are slightly more at risk of seeing certain content before they're ready. And the reason why people go so hard at the Brony fandom over this is because a lot of the time when people protested, the pushback was often very hostile and the Bronies instead doubled down on it instead of stopping to think for a moment. One person who commented on my Bluey post mentions this and speaks about how they would indulge in MLP's grimdark content when they were younger, but while they do like to create dark works of things they like, they don't want to inflict that kind of imagery on someone who may not want to see it. That's a good attitude to have, and no one wants to stop you from creating these things. It's just the understanding that you need to be more careful of others sometimes. So with all of that said, let's wrap this up and move on to our final section. Part 3. Will it happen again? Short answer, no. I think the differences of the two shows outweigh the similarities for Bluey to even have a chance at developing a fanbase as toxic as MLP. MLP's fandom of older men was formed on a forum website that is known for dogpiling and harassing people they don't agree with and treating it like a funny meme. Bluey's fandom, by comparison, while still partially being on a platform that encourages a lot of harassment and negativity, is comprised of people who view the series as a respite for their mental health and an aid towards repairing their own conceptions of childhood and family. These people, in my opinion, are far less likely to go around creating inappropriate works of the show and getting hostile when people express concern at that, because they're not trying to be edgy for kicks like the Bronies were. Fandom just isn't the same as it once was, and in cases like this, that's kind of a good thing. One thing that is constant with fandom though, that I just want to touch on before we wrap this up, is the discussion of theories. Most notably, something that always seems to happen with more light-hearted shows is that people will try to compose these dark, sometimes edgy theories in order to give aspects of the show a more mature undertone as perceived by fans. With Bluey being a show aimed at literal 5-year-olds, they're really not that dark. But yeah, this is partially why Bluey and MLP are being compared. There seems to be a popular fan theory for the show where people believe that Bluey is a rainbow baby, which is a baby that is born after a miscarriage, stillbirth, or other such form of infant mortality, who is considered kind of a miracle in a way after such a tragic loss. This is kind of a weird mix of emotional but heartwarming, but I kind of see this as a testament to the difference in views between the two shows. There is also another theory where people think that Bluey's parents and the neighbours are having affairs with each other, which, you know, gotta get those ships in, am I right? That's not me trying to say I think infidelity is fine, but sometimes it's okay to laugh at cheeky things, you know? But personally, I think these kinds of theories, and just the sheer difference in scale to what we know about MLP, epitomizes the difference between the two series, rather than the similarities regarding both the content and the perceptions from the fans. In MLP, the dark fan theories were a lot more grand and twisted, because MLP was a fantasy story with longer episodes and multiple seasons. It had villains, character arcs, treacherous missions, consequences. The characters all had their own personal stakes in things, and these really lended themselves to all of those theories. Bluey, by comparison, is a slice-of-life show. There are no dark and mysterious villains plotting to destroy Bluey's home and enslave her family. There are no dangerous threats to the kids' lives, unless you count the Australian wildlife. And all in all, the people making these comparisons are more so doing it as a preventative measure, it feels like, rather than condemning an existing problem. And that therein is where I think there's a pretty big distinction. A lot of the comparisons being made are just things that naturally occur when a fandom is formed and continues to grow, and it shouldn't be taken as an indication of toxicity. It's important to note that even with any controversies that happened with the MLP fandom, the reason there were seemingly so many was because, as we said before, the percentage of bad apples in the bunch also gets bigger and poisons more people. Will someone take it too far at some point with a fandom like Bluey? Probably, that happens like 9 times out of 10. But don't let dumb people frothing at the mouth about something impact your enjoyment of it. Having a deep-rooted anxiety crazy about things that can't really be prevented will only make you miss out on stuff. Sometimes you need to just accept that some people will be like that and move on with your own life. What matters is that if you like a show and are able to derive some form of joy from it, whether that be idealizing a fictional family or looking back on fond memories, no one can really take that away from you. Just enjoy what you want to enjoy. Thank you for watching, and if you like this video, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. What's your favourite episode of Bluey? What's your favourite episode of MLP? Do you think the Bluey fandom will grow to anything bigger than what it is now? Leave your thoughts below, and I will speak to you all very soon. Stay safe, everyone. Bye!